Today, we're diving into one of the most meticulously planned and, well, dramatically unraveled heists in human history. I mean, it literally sounds like a Hollywood script, right? But every single detail we're going to talk about is completely real. We are going to break down exactly how a crew pulled off what everyone called the crime of the century, hijacking a Royal Mail train and just vanishing with an absolute fortune. So, let's jump right in.
Okay, so think about this for a second. How do you steal millions from a speeding train without firing a single bullet? That's the core mystery here. We're dropping you right into the dead of night, where this brilliantly simple but honestly incredibly dangerous trick brought a massive government-run Royal Mail train to a dead stop. You see, this wasn't some messy smash and grab. No, this was a highly orchestrated operation. It took crazy precision, perfect timing, and absolute silence.
So let's set the stage. It's the evening of August 7th, 1963. You've got this 12-carriage train packed with 72 postal sorting staff, and it heads out of Glasgow. Fast forward to the early hours of August 8th, right at 3 a.m. A 58-year-old train driver named Jack Mills is just hurling through the pitch-black night toward London. And then, out of nowhere, he sees a red signal at a place called Sears Crossing. Now, Royal Mail trains were heavily prioritized, so hitting a red light here, super abnormal. But, following protocol, Mills hits the brakes and stops the train, completely unaware that he was stepping straight into a trap.
The sheer low-tech genius of this trap is actually kind of staggering. The mastermind, a guy named Bruce Reynolds, along with a crew of over 15 men, which included this notorious gang called the South Coast Raiders, they executed 4 unbelievably precise steps. Get this, they literally just covered the green track signal with a glove and powered the red light with a battery. That's it. When the assistant driver got out to use the trackside phone, surprise, the wires were totally cut. And within seconds, the gang ambushed the crew, completely isolating the engine from the outside world.
Now, here's the thing. They didn't want the whole train. They specifically wanted the high-value package, or HVP, carriage. This specific carriage, M3024M, had been attached a bit earlier in the journey, and the only reason the gang knew about it was because of a massive insider secret. They were being fed info by an unknown senior security officer at Royal Mail. So they knew exactly where the cash was, and more importantly, they knew exactly which carriage to hit.
And the real genius of this tip-off was all about timing. Years prior, the post office had actually ordered high-tech security alarms for these carriages. And by 1961, they had 3 of them ready to go. But, as luck would have it, on this exact night, those alarmed carriages were out of service for repairs. The gang knew that Royal Mail was going to have to use an older backup carriage, that M324M one, which had absolutely 0 security alarms. It was basically a sitting duck out there on the tracks.
But why strike on this specific night, right? Well, normally, an HVP carriage carried around, say, 300,000 pounds. A lot of money, sure, but the previous weekend happened to be a UK bank holiday. Because of that, the volume of cash physically moving through the mail was just astronomically high. The gang knew this unprotected carriage wouldn't just be carrying the usual amount. It was going to be loaded with roughly 3 million pounds. It was the perfect storm: maximum payout, minimum security.
To really wrap our heads around the scale of this, we've got to look at the modern equivalent. That night, the carriage was stuffed with £1, £5, and 10-shilling notes that, if you adjust for inflation today, translates to a staggering 67 million pounds. Or, to put it another way, roughly 800 crore rupees. I mean, it is almost incomprehensible to imagine that much physical cash just rolling down the tracks in a single, unalarmed wooden train car.
Okay, so here is where this perfectly oiled machine hits its first real snag. The gang actually brought along their own guy, a retired railway driver, to move the train to their unloading spot. But when he hops into the engine, the controls are way newer than what he was used to, and the guy just panics. He freezes. So to keep the whole plan from falling apart, the gang violently strikes the original driver, Jack Mills, over the head with an iron rod, and they force him to drive the train 1 kilometer down the tracks to a place called Bridego Bridge.
Waiting right below that bridge were an Austin Lodestar truck and a couple of Land Rovers, all sporting fake license plates. The robbers stormed the carriage and quickly tied up the stunned postal staff. Then, working like an absolute machine, they formed a human chain. In just 15 high-adrenaline minutes, out of 128 incredibly heavy mailbags, they managed to load 120 into their truck. They literally moved 2.5 tons of cash, only leaving 8 bags behind simply because they ran out of time.
So, they've got the money.
But as they're making their big escape into the night, one of the robbers throws out a threat to the tied-up postal workers. He tells them, "Don't move for 30 minutes." Now, obviously, he just wanted to buy the crew a nice head start. But man, this single sentence, it was their very first fatal mathematical mistake. They essentially just handed the authorities the exact blueprint for their capture.
Think about it. By telling the staff exactly how long they had to wait before calling for help, the gang unwittingly gave the police a strict geographical time limit. The cops instantly did the math on how far a heavily loaded truck could reasonably travel on dark rural roads in exactly 30 minutes. And boom! That created a hard 50-kilometer search radius. So instead of scrambling to search the entire country, the police knew exactly where to draw their circle on the map.
And sure enough, where did the gang go? They retreated to a hideout they'd rented months in advance called Leather Slade Farmhouse. The kicker? It sat exactly 43 kilometers from the crime scene, tucked perfectly inside that 50-kilometer radius. Safe inside, they celebrated and split up the 2.5 million pound loot. Every single member walked away with a cut that'd be worth about 3.9 million pounds today. But, unfortunately for them, the walls were already starting to close in.
You know, paranoia sets in pretty fast when you've just committed the crime of the century. They were listening to the police chatter on a VHF radio and quickly realized that the search grid was right on top of them. Terrified, they totally abandoned their plan to leave on Sunday and bolted early on Friday instead. They even paid a guy to burn the farmhouse down to ash to destroy the evidence. But the helper just pocketed the cash and vanished, leaving the farm untouched. And to make matters worse, a neighbor who was eyeing a 10,000-pound reward noticed some sketchy activity and tipped off the cops.
So when the police finally raid this perfectly intact farmhouse, they stumble onto an absolute treasure trove of evidence. We're talking empty mailbags, a hastily painted yellow truck, and then they found the ultimate clue. See, before the panic set in, the gang had been hanging out, celebrating their historic heist by playing a game of Monopoly. But here's the crazy part. They weren't using the colorful paper money from the box. They were playing the game using the actual, real, stolen Royal Mail cash. Now, give them some credit, the gang had been incredibly meticulous about wiping down the entire house for fingerprints before they fled. But in their panicked rush to get out of there, they completely forgot to wipe down the Monopoly board and the little game pieces. Scotland Yard came in, lifted those prints directly off the board and ran them. And because a lot of the crew, especially the guys from the South Coast Raiders, already had criminal records, the fingerprints were an immediate perfect match.
It's wild, right? This single, careless oversight with a family board game literally led to the complete dismantling of the entire gang. Within days, the authorities swept in. Out of the 16 total gang members, 14 were swiftly tracked down and arrested. And let me tell you, the court showed absolutely zero leniency for this whole operation. They handed down massive 30-year prison sentences to the majority of the crew.
Now, while the location of the heist, Bridego Bridge, sort of passed into legend and became informally known as Train Robbers Bridge, the reality of that night was a lot darker. The true tragedy fell on the driver, Jack Mills. The severe head injury he got when the gang assaulted him left him with permanent trauma. He was never, ever able to return to his job, and tragically, he passed away just 7 years later from the lingering shock and complications of that night.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, and a lingering mystery that survives to this very day. 14 men were caught, yes, but 2 of them vanished like absolute ghosts. The identity of that panicked replacement driver who froze at the controls, never discovered. And even more wild, the mastermind informant, that senior security officer who tipped them off about the unalarmed carriage and the bank holiday cash in the first place, they have never been identified. So I'll leave you with this to chew on. How does someone orchestrate the greatest heist in history from the shadows, watch the entire gang take the fall, and successfully take a secret like that to the grave?